Okay, we'll start a little bit earlier, but yeah, but the talk can just take a little bit longer than 25 minutes. So we indeed will just touch just consensus basics, and we'll try to look at how they implement it into protocols that are used in practice. Does it work? Okay, yeah, now it works. So, so basically, first I'll introduce the problem, what is consensus, and then we will explore these two consensus protocols. We'll just explore how the basics are implemented, and then at the end we'll just discuss what are the trade-offs between these protocols. Yeah. Okay, let's get started. So when we're talking about consensus, then we want basically to coordinate different participants such that they can maintain and extend the log of transactions. What does it mean? It means that we want in this protocol to support these two kind of properties. The first one is basically says that safety, that if you have two logs of any two honest participants, then they should be consistent, meaning that one should be a prefix of another. And the second property means liveness. It means that if there is a valid transaction that appears in the input stream of one of the participants, then it should eventually be included in the log. And when I mentioned, say, this low latency blockchains, then we want to minimize the time between the transaction is in the input stream and it's eventually included in the log of all honest participants. That's what we want to kind of like improve. And we'll just discuss a little bit the latency of the following protocols. So just to demonstrate this, like what I'm talking about, so we have some transaction input for each of the participants, and then over time the logs are growing. They don't need to be the same at any moment in time, but we want to support this property of consistency, safety, meaning that one is a prefix of another. But what the participants can do, they can communicate with each other. So we assume that there is a point-to-point communication between all pairs of participants. And this property is quite important for especially low latency blockchains, because if you want to scale it a little bit, then if you have too many, say, nodes in your network, then it's hard to establish this point-to-point communication. You have clusters, and then clusters will need also to have some external communication between each other, and that's basically a little bit delay like this latency of transactions. And we also assume that each message is eventually delivered. That means that if we have a message, then we don't know exactly when this message will be delivered to your peer. So it could be in 50 milliseconds, it could be longer, because in practice, communication is not necessarily synchronous. It's probably synchronous kind of like most of the time, but not always, because sometimes there are some problems, say electricity outage or whatever else. And as a practical trade-off between like completely asynchronous network and synchronous, what we usually just consider so-called partially synchronous model, when until a certain moment called global stabilization time, the communication is asynchronous, and nobody knows about this moment when that happens except probably adversary. And after that moment, communication gets synchronous, and you have some predicted delay for sending and receiving messages. And I focus here your attention that we have some parameter delta, and Usually this is a protocol parameter. For consensus protocols, you basically assume that after this moment JST, this delay is at most, say, 200 milliseconds or 500 milliseconds or something a little bit bigger. And this is very useful for partially synchronous protocol because when you cannot proceed with the next step, then you can probably send some timeout message to other participants, or you can proceed to the next phase with some additional parameter which proves that you proceed with after waiting the delay. So, but the network latency is not the only challenge. Definitely what we need to assume that some nodes can be Byzantine faults. It means that they can deviate from the protocol arbitrarily, and they can lie about about something. They can withhold their messages. They cannot communicate. And of course, we cannot tolerate as many Byzantine faults as possible. So there is a limit on how we can communicate, and the standard limit is that less than 1/3 of all participants are Byzantine. And this is basically a threshold. If it's less than 1/3, then it's possible to tolerate that many Byzantine faults. If it's more than that, then it's not possible. It's like there is like impossibility results about that for partially synchronous model. And what you can derive from this like property of quorum, if you know that the quorum is of all participants are honest, you can derive that if you take any two quorums, then there is at least one honest party in the intersection. And since all like consensus protocols, they rely somehow on quorums. So if you have a quorum of statements, then you can proceed to the next phase, you can proceed to the next round. And to prove some safety property about consistency, you can basically rely on that honest guy who participated in that quorum, and since he's honest and doesn't want to just break the protocol, based on that knowledge, we can argue about the safety of the protocol, about the consistency of the logs of all participants, of all honest participants. So, and if you have quorums, then what we can do, we can construct so-called quorum certificates. It's basically if we have a quorum of participants that agree on something, for instance, they send their partial signatures or they send some special messages, then you can aggregate those statements, those votes into so-called certificates. And if it's like supported by signatures, then they can share this certificate, and it will prove to other participants that there is an agreement between the supermajority of the network about something. And it not necessarily, we can also agree, for instance, that your timeout expired in some round. Okay, and now we have all the basics that to present the protocols. So let's start with the first one, Jolteon. And in this protocol, we want to also to create a chain of blocks, like blockchain. But this is like a Byzantine fault tolerant protocol. And here, when we have these blocks, they are not just linked by hash pointers, but together with the hash pointer, we attach a quorum certificate. So how this quorum certificate is basically built. So when the first participants created its block in first round, then it sent it, it multicast its block to every party, and every party upon reception, it says, okay, it's valid block, it's all good, and they sign it with partial signature, and then they send this partial signature to the next guy who will produce block. So the next leader in round 2 will be the guy, this guy, second guy, and he will aggregate the signatures. And when creating the block, it will include not only the hash pointer to the previous block, but also a quorum agreement on the previous block, a quorum of votes, or a quorum certificate for the previous block. And this way the protocol proceeds. So every round we have a rotation between leaders. So in round 2, second guy, round 3, third guy, etc. And normally the protocol, like in steady states, when everything goes right, it operates in this way. So the leader aggregates signatures received from the quorum of participants. It creates a block. The block points to the previous block, and this hash pointer is kind of like, or the previous block is supported by the quorum certificate. But what happens if we have, say, Byzantine faults or some asynchronous period? In that case, for instance, let's say that this guy decided to not multicast its block, but send it to only one party. In this case, the protocol needs to proceed to achieve liveness. So what others are going to do, they will not wait forever. They will wait for a timeout. So they were aware of this block. They were at round 3. And now they wait for maximum timeout. That's what we discussed, delta. And then they multicast the timeout signatures to everybody else. And after 2 timeouts here, what will happen is basically these partial timeout signatures can be aggregated in the quorum, in the timeout quorum certificate, which will basically prove that a quorum of network experienced timeout in that round, and we have a legit reason to skip the block proposal in round 4. So what will happen basically, the first leader, which the leader of round 5 will create its block. It will point at block at round 3 over here, and it will include not only quorum certificate for this block, but also a timeout quorum certificate. And everybody will agree on this because it proves you that the quorum of the network experienced timeout in that round. Okay, and now, as you can see, we can construct not necessarily a blockchain, but block tree. But these branches, they are actually not very long. They cannot be very long because we have a special commit rule. So how we can then decide what will be our ledger? So what we'll do, we just look at this blockchain, and we find 2 latest adjacent certified blocks. This block is certified by this certificate. This block is certified by this certificate. And we commit this first one and all its history. And what appears in the log is basically the sequence of all transactions, starting from here and ending over there. So as you can see, it's so-called 2-chain commit rule. And it follows so-called lock and commit. 2 phases, lock and commit. So you can have a 1-chain commit rule because then the protocol will lose either safety or liveness. So you need at least such 2 phases, such that when you have a quorum certificate, here, it basically says you that a quorum of the network observes this quorum certificate. And since they observe this quorum certificate, they will kind of lock on this prefix of the chain, and they will not change the decision. They will not vote for something contradicting with this prefix. Yeah, that way it works. Okay, and basically if you just want then to measure the latency for transactions to appear in the log, say it's immediately included in the block over here, then the block needs to be sent to everybody else. Then everybody else should send the partial signature to the next leader. So basically there are 2 round trips, 2 network trips over here, 2 network trips over here. And also for sending the last block, we also need to spend 1 more network trip. So altogether 5 network trips. And the second protocol that I'm going to talk about has a little bit different design. So here, we have every participant is a block proposal in every round, so we don't have this rotation between participants who is going to create a block in a given round, so everybody creates their blocks. And that means that we have not one link to the blocks in the previous round, but possibly many links. So the first rule just for building this DAG is that you need to create one block per round and multicast it to send it to everybody else. Of course, if you have an adversary, then it can create equivocations and it can send their blocks arbitrarily, not necessarily to everybody. So the second rule that we are going to talk about is that you should not proceed with creating blocks at your own pace. You should wait until you have a quorum of blocks from the previous round. So you basically need to wait until a quorum of network advanced already at that stage, and after that you can proceed with creating blocks in the next round. Next one, since we have here a DAG, and at the end of the day we need to have a lock, we need to linearize this DAG structure and get a sequence of blocks. One of the options for that is just to rely on leaders. So basically now what we are going to do is we again want to assign leaders, but these leaders will be useful just for linearization of the DAG structure. And say in the second round we have this leader, and then before creating a block in round 3, we wait not only for the quorum of blocks from round 2, but we also wait until a leader block pops up in our local DAG. And only after that we can create a block, because our block will be used as a vote for the leader. So previously everyone just created partial signature as a vote, and the next leader aggregated that signature in the quorum certificate. Now we want to mimic all these notions of certificates directly on the DAG, and this is the way how we're going to do it. So the second, say we have a second vote here for the leader, and it's extracted from the DAG structure, and if you have like a quorum of blocks in the round 3, then it serves as implicit certificate for that leader block. At the same time, similar as we just had a timeout certificate, if you don't have a leader block, it doesn't pop up, we shouldn't wait for very long. So we wait maximum for some timeout, after which we create our blocks in the next round. And since there is no votes for the leader, these 3 blocks, they serve as the timeout certificate for the rest of the network. So this is a legit reason to skip the leader proposal when we will do linearization of the DAG. But let's again focus on the good case when everything goes right. So as I said, these 3 blocks serve as a quorum certificate as a vote for this leader block. So previously we had so-called 2-chain commit rule. So when we had 2 certified blocks, then we can commit the first one. We had a quorum of the network observing a quorum certificate for some block, then we were able to commit. Here we just do the same. So we observe, and this guy basically observes this quorum. But previously we needed a quorum of such blocks. So if we have a quorum of these blocks, then we can commit this leader. So this is the place where we basically mimic the same logic as we had previously. And now the difference is that you multicast your blocks, and this happens much faster. So previously, just to get this first certificate, you needed to wait it for 2 network trips. Now the time between rounds is shorter, so you just multicast it, and under synchrony, the time between 2 rounds is actually 1 network trip, not 2 network trips. Okay, so this is the basic logic how we're gonna commit the leader blocks. And say that we have some specific DAG in our local perception, so something. Then in order to sequence all the blocks and get the log of transactions, what we're gonna do, we're gonna just try to commit all leaders in the past. So here the first leader that we can commit is basically this one, because we don't have many blocks in round 6, etc. And the same we can say that this leader is also committed, because we can find the quorum certificates as I explained before. So all these 3 leaders can be committed. And what we now need to do, we want to traverse all these leaders from the past to the most recent committed leader, traverse their past history, and pick up the blocks that are not yet traversed. So first we traverse that one, nothing to traverse. Then we traverse this one, only these 2 blocks are picked up, and we can then establish the sequence of all blocks. So first goes this one, then goes blocks with this color, and lastly we have blocks with that color. Yeah, and if we compute the latency in this case, then it takes a little bit less time. So for most of the blocks to be linearized, it takes like 4 rounds on average, or 4 network trips. Okay, and finally, just to conclude, so we just discussed 2 protocols. They have a little bit different designs, because one employs chain, blockchain, another is block DAG, and the metadata that we need to have for every block is a little bit different. Here it's constant. Here, for every round, it's quadratic, because we have quite many block proposals, quite many references. But here we rely on specific messages. Here we rely directly on the DAG. We interpret the references as votes, as timeouts. Yeah. While in Jolteon, we just construct explicit certificate. Yeah, that's pretty much it. Yeah, if you have questions, then you can ask it now.